This video is going to cover the both sides adjustment. Both sides is the terminology that Konica Minolta uses to describe the positioning and alignment of the image on the front and the back of a sheet of paper. We had touched on this briefly before in an earlier video about paper settings. If I come into the paper settings, then select a tray and hit change set, we will see one of the options here is the both sides adjustment. When we see here that it says offset default, that just means that all the settings on this tray are set to 0. So if I click on the both sides adjustment, we can come in and see this is the both sides adjustment screen. We've got several different tabs up here at the top. We'll cover those. The main reason I wanted to come into here was to show you that this is the both sides adjustment as you access it from the paper settings. If I come back to the main screen, the machine screen, and I click on the both sides adjustment next to it, I get the exact same set of screens and options here. The difference between settings that you make on this screen and the settings that you make in the paper feed is that if we see here, tray number 1 is selected. I've got my values. This is the front of the sheet of paper. I'll enter a value here just so that we can see that it goes in, and I've now got a vertical of 0.55% in reference to the 0 that was in that before. If I come back to the machine screen now and I look in the paper settings and I go back to tray number 1 and I look at the settings under both sides adjustment, now that 55 that I entered into the both sides adjustment screen appears here as well. The biggest difference between the two screens is that when I access this through the paper settings, I've got the register and OK button at the bottom. If I click the register and OK button, I can either create a new store with these values in there, or I can overwrite the existing profile that had the zeros in there before. From here, if I go back to the both sides adjustment screen, I will look at tray number 4. As we look at tray number 4, we will see that my adjustments for the front side of the sheet are entered here. The adjustments for the back side of the sheet are entered on the back tab. Rotate and skew likewise has some adjustment measurements in there. These can be adjusted in several ways. If I go back to tray number 1, I can manually just put a number in here and say, okay, I no longer want this to be 0.55%. I can clear that value out. I can come in and just manually enter a set of values that I want this to be, and I can use the plus or minus to increase or decrease from the 0 point on that. And by setting those values, I can just directly adjust the position and the zoom, or in the case of I was on the rotate and skew, I could adjust the rotation and the skew of the image on the sheet from there. So it may or may not be something that you can just look at the sheet and figure out these are the adjustments I need to put in. So the first thing that we can do is a semi-manual adjustment of, I can output a chart adjustment. If I output the adjustment chart, we come to a screen and we see that it shows us that I'm going to print out a sheet of paper that I'm then going to take these measurements on. Once I take those measurements, I will enter the values that I get from those measurements into this screen here based on where those measurements were taken. And then I will click the adjustment start button to actually enter values in. So the place to start from here then is I click on the print mode button. It brings up a screen that already has tray number 1 selected in there. I would hit the start button and it would print out the sheet of paper that I would need. I then go back in and based on the output of the sheet and measure the position of each of the points as outlined on this little diagram here, I could go in and I could enter in values. Based on the measurements I get, if I go from the edge of the sheet to mark number 1, From that mark to mark number 2 and follow my way around, I capture all the values that should be entered into this area. Tenths of a millimeter are important. Accuracy is very important. The more accurate and precise you can get your numbers to be when you make those measurements and enter them into this table, the more likely it is you're going to end up with good registration. Once I have all those measurements entered, I click the Start Adjustment button, and the Start Adjustment will calculate new values, enter those in so that now I've got my position values from here. Moving on to the back of the sheet, then I click the back button and I can have a chart adjustment as well. When I do the chart adjustment, you will see that now we have a different chart that prints out. In this case, what we're doing is using the front side of the sheet as a reference point, printing this sheet out, and then measuring the difference between the front of the sheet and the back of the sheet, and enter our values here. So as you can see, you look through the sheet, look at the gap between the cross that was printed on the front of the sheet, the crosshairs on the back of the sheet, and determine what measurements need to be entered. So as you can see here, I've got my y-axis, I've got my x-axis, and I've got the plus and minus direction for each of them. So I could say that I had a +1 on the y-axis. I may have a 1/2 of a millimeter. On measurement number 2, I will also say that I had a 1 and a 0.5. Point number 3, I'm going to say that I was off by a millimeter on that as well, but I was off in the negative direction. And I'm just going to continue down through these and enter values in until I get set of values installed. And then when I do the start adjustment here, we come back and we see that the machine has made calculations based on the differences between the front and the back and put values in here. You'll also notice down here at the bottom of the front and back screen, I've got a reset front and back adjustment. If I do the reset front and back adjustment, it's going to take all those measurements back to 0. It's going to ask me to confirm. And now if I come back into the back adjustment where I had values before, it does a reset on these. One of the things that you need to be aware of on this is that if I print a chart out, I make my measurements, I enter values, it comes back with adjustment values in this screen. I could go back into the chart adjustment, print another chart out to refine that process. When I come back into my chart adjustment now, these values start with the values that had been calculated before. So these will still read 0 even though the machine is no longer at a 0 position. One of the reasons this is important is because you are now stacking readings on top of readings, and if somewhere along the line you make a mistake and you get a minus where there should be a plus, or you reverse some measurements or enter a bad measurement, that gets averaged in and you may never be able to straighten that back out and get the adjustment back to where it will line back up. If you want to fine tune it a little bit and it doesn't get better, do a reset and start over again. From here, I can go to the rotate and skew adjustment. When we look at the rotate and skew adjustment, once again, this got a little diagram here that shows me what this is going to adjust. I've got a chart adjust on here, and similar to the backside adjustment, I print the sheet out. I sight through that sheet to look at the cross marks on the front of the sheet, compare it to the hashes on the backside of the sheet, and look at the difference in position, enter those values in as my XY adjustments, and hit the Start Adjustment button. Another option that there is, you'll see the 4th tab on my both sides adjustment screen, is the gap adjustment. So with the gap adjustment, it starts with the premise that the front side of your sheet is in the correct position, and your goal is to just get the back side of the sheet to match it. Maybe you're not exactly concerned with the position of the front side being centered on the sheet, as long as the back and the front matches, so when you take it over to your cutter, they cut. For the gap adjustment, once again, I've got a adjustment chart that I can print out, so I would go into the print mode once again. I would tell it that I want to print that sheet by hitting the start button. Once I've printed that sheet out, I exit from there. I look through the sheet and I measure the difference against the hash marks on the four sides of it, and I enter the values in here. So I've got plus or minus values for the A direction. If I go to the B, you'll see that I've got plus and minus that I can make adjustments on this. And once I enter all my values in for A, B, C, and D, I can then hit my adjustment start and it will calculate values out as well. The last button on this screen is based on the configuration of the machine that I'm attached to. This machine has the IQ501 quality adjustment module in the finishing. What this allows me to do is I can let the machine make all the measurements, let the machine make all the calculations, and have it enter the values in. So in this case, I choose my tray. I'm going to come down to print mode. I'll just print this sheet out, and when this sheet gets printed out, it will come back and it will automatically calculate and enter the values in for that, and then those values will be what will be used for printing that job out. If I were to close back out and then come back over to my paper settings, I would see that in this tray, if I go to the change settings and I go to both sides, the adjustment that I had made on the both sides adjustment, getting to it from the button, would still be entered in here, but they do not exist in the paper catalog. If I wanted to store those with this paper catalog entry, as I mentioned earlier, I go into register and OK, and I tell it that I want to overwrite those values, or I want to store this as a new profile because it's a little different page or use than what I had before. Now we see that I am connected to a different machine and I have a different option in the last position. So in this case, I've got a scan measure reading that's available for a both sides adjustment. This configuration of machine will have a copy scan glass that I can use to take measurements, but it does not have the IQ501. If I have the IQ501 and the copy glass, I still do not have this available as an option. I just have the auto adjust that we've already discussed. So in this case, I've got the scan measurement. So in order to use the scan measurement, we will see that I've got two pages I need to print out. So this first page is going to print out a sheet of paper that is just going to have a black background on it. I'm going to use that black background as an overlay behind the sheet that I'm going to measure on the copy glass so that I can have a reference point for the machine to scan that document, know where the edge of the page is, know where the marks are on the page, and it can calculate values to put into the both sides adjustment. So first I'm going to go into Output Background Sheet. When I click Output Background Sheet, it's going to come back and say, here's the paper feed. Which tray do I want to pull the sheet from? I'm going to say that I want to do an 11 by 17 sheet of paper so that I can have something that will cover the whole copy glass. When I get it ready to print, I can hit the Start button and it will print that page out. Once I have that page printed out, then I come down to the next section where it says Output Adjustment Chart. So when I click Output Adjustment Chart, it comes back and now I choose which tray it is that I'm going to print from. It's already pre-selected tray 1 because that is what we had chosen in the both sides adjustment. Once I get to ready to print, I will hit my Start button so that I can print out my page. Then I exit back out of print mode. I now have number 2, Scan Adjustment Chart. So this will let me put the sheets that I've put out onto the copy glass and scan those in to get measurements. When I click that button, it shows me and gives me some written instructions on what I should do. So the first thing I do is I take the second sheet of paper that I printed out that has my registration target on it, and I lay that on the copy glass. You can see that I have it 2 inches from both the back guide and the left side guide. Lay it on the glass so that front is facing up to me when I look at it from laying on the copy glass. I then take my black sheet that I printed out for the first sheet and I lay that behind it. Then I click the start button. Once it does its calculations, it will let me flip my sheet around so that the front designation is to the back. So what it will look like when it's laying on the copy glass is like this. I'll put my black sheet of paper behind it once again and hit the start button to scan that page. Then I'll flip the sheet over, I'll do the back, and I'll flip the back around and do the back again, each time hitting the start button. And once those measurements have been taken, I can store those measurements into the machine and my both sides adjustment will reflect those numbers.